He said I could steal a little bit of time. All right, 11:48. I don't think the governor's here. You can hear us actually negotiating some more time. I'm going to try to grab 2 segments from the governor, get him out of here by 2:15. Is that okay, Mike-ish? Okay. All right, Mike Traynor, communications director, gave me the nod. So he's running the show, Governor, not you. He tells you where you're going, how you do it.
Baloney.
Steve Constantino, Health and Human Services Secretary, is also here to be able to help answer some questions. All right, well, the checklist is long, and we're not going to get to everything, but the idea that you have presented a 2-tiered tax system, 1% and 6%, is actually, for me, more of a 3-tiered tax system, it seems, because you've introduced this concept where you had the campaign concept of 1% on some exempt items. You have now brought exempt items into 2 categories, lowering the idea from 7 to 6, but putting a whole bunch of stuff. You'd have to have a calculator and a BlackBerry to try to figure out what in the hell is going to be taxed, Governor. So explain to me what your thinking process is there, and how do you think it could possibly work?
Well, the basic premise is to broaden the sales tax into those items that have been exempt. And some we just can't put on clothing, for instance, on the lower 6%. So that's 1%. Some of those items we'd prefer just to keep it a low number. And we just have to close this $295 million deficit. It's not easy. We've already made the huge cuts over the last 3 years in which there were no new revenues coming in over the last 3 years. So everything in the past 3 years has been done on cuts. So they're really we continue to make those cuts, but it's just more and more difficult every year. So the concept is to broaden the sales tax into those exempt items, but lower it. And I want to continue to do that. My goal is really 5.75%
All right, I'm going to take a liberty.
This session.
I'm going to take a liberty here. Not that it's his job right now, but his vast experience, just for reference as opposed to philosophy.
Yeah, Steve's been through this.
As finance chairman, I was saying yesterday, I recall lots of conversations about dropping from 7 to 4, 7 to 5, broadening out. But all of those conversations were about revenue neutrality, were they not, for the most part?
Yeah.
Join me on the show, will you?
I mean, yes. I mean, ultimately, they were about revenue neutrality, but I will say it was probably at a time when the revenues were at least decent enough to be able to run government with net revenue neutrality. And the other thing, you have to realize that when you were going to 4, or when those discussions happened, you were talking about also taxing some areas that the governor has decided not to tax, in grocery items, for example, which is probably the largest item that you could bring revenue in. He made, and I believe, a very wise decision in not going there and taxing, groceries. So in order to get that low, you really had to tax items that would have really severely impacted Rhode Islanders to a point where it would have been
Got it.
not a good thing.
But the concept back then was revenue neutrality in the spirit of economic image and statement, that we're a different place, we're a competitive place. So I'm not sure, Governor, that this is what you're accomplishing here. You campaigned on $90 million worth of nuance of new tax. Now you got $157 million in new revenues in totality. There are plenty of folks who are screaming at you already over 24 hours saying, come on, man, what is this? We cannot tax our way into a solution. So let me ask you this. What's your philosophy? Because looking at the path to prosperity was the theme the other night. I call it a maze because I'm trying to figure out where the path leads, because there's a bunch of stuff running in the same direction, in 2 different directions in the same pipe. So explain to me what the philosophy is.
The general philosophy is close the budget deficit. That's a huge task. And it can't all be done on cuts. I recognized that during the campaign. I wish I could have said, as governor, I'm going to close that $295 million just on cuts. But it's half on cuts, half on revenue enhancements. The other element
of this,
it's
actually 2 for 1,
finish.
isn't
I
it?
have 3 things, 3 basic philosophies in this budget. Yeah. Close the deficit, invest in schools, and prevent any structural problems from occurring. We don't want to have a budget that's going to be in the fiscal year 2013, 2014, continue to have structural problems. So I want a long-term view.
Well, tell me how it goes 1 for 1 or halfy when you've got $80 million worth of to be determined or explained cuts and $160 million worth of, I do the math, that's 2 to 1. You got a 2 to 1 tax to cut ratio in this idea, do you not?
No, it's about half. Yes, we did take some money that was some federal money that went to the schools and put that in the revenue column.
I thought the revenues are worth about 160, and the cuts that you've announced are worth 80.
No, it's more closer to 148. I don't have the figures right in front of me. but it's closer to half.
Okay, let me ask you this. We'll talk to Steve about some of the Health and Human Services cuts, but you more or less just brush through, and I'm asking for $20 million from my departments and my directors. I'm like, oh, really? Okay, that's good. How are they doing that? Do you have a plan? Have they actually told you where it's going to be?
Yes. As mayor, I know that through attrition, you can get terrific savings. And as people retire, as they move, and that does occur, you can get terrific savings. And you just don't fill the positions.
So
and
that's a vacancy strategy is what you're telling me?
Yes. Yeah.
For the most part?
Yes, and I've lived it for 7 years as mayor.
All right, so there's no smoking gun or red herring or missing trick here. It's the $20 million in department cuts is simply not replacing jobs.
Yes, that's a big part of it.
And that we've got that kind of turnover speed that $20 million can be saved, boom, just by not replacing jobs?
Yes, I think that's 3% of every department.
All right, so it's $60 million in Health and Human Services. Steve, for a long time, now you're the secretary, you have a perspective on this. Of course, you've just been in there for a couple of months, but you've been watching House Finance for a long, long time. I've always talked about a very interesting dynamic, and that is the labor unions and everybody else complain, understandably sometimes, about their haircuts and pension worries and all of that. They never turn on, for lack of a better term, the welfare state. And I don't understand why. Because I do think that if there's any fertile ground out there, bless you, Governor, you're not allergic to me, right?
No.
I do think that if there is fertile ground, it's in your category now. Right? If there's fertile ground?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a little bit of fertile ground in every category, but you're right, because if you look at this budget, and generally it's not unlike other state budgets, 40% of the budget is in Health and Human Services. The other add to that, what's been really concerning us, is that the growth rate in Health and Human Services, particularly in Medicaid, is about 6.97%. That is totally outpacing the growth rate in our economy. So you're correct. That's where the stress is on this budget, and that's what really causes, at least in these departments, a structural deficit problem. Your growth is going at one rate, your economy is going at another rate. That differential rate is what is causing a major problem in balancing budgets, not only in Rhode Island, but in other states.
So when you guys target $60 million out of Health and Human Services, is that bureaucratic efficiencies, or is that stuff that's going to change people's lives?
It is probably a combination of both. It is bureaucratic efficiencies, because what I found in 3 weeks, and we did a little different process than the rest of government, I did a complete analysis in 3 weeks from the bottom up. And in that analysis, the first thing we asked, are there things we just shouldn't be doing? Because we're not doing it well. Number one, are there payment systems that we have used that are 20 to 30 years old, that do not reflect the modern age in terms of how we reimburse our providers? Yes, and there's a lot of savings that are built in changing those models. And yes, there's going to be an impact, direct impact on some of the providers in terms of changing putting forth those reforms, so you get the type of, so nursing homes are going to be affected. Hospitals are going to be affected.
In what way?
They're going to be affected in terms of, we're going to force systems we're going to pay for those services that appropriately place people in a continuum of care. So you know the old adage, 20% of the individuals in these systems are spending 80% of the money because they're not managed correctly within the system. They stay in the highest level of service because the incentive is to keep them in the highest level of service. Yeah. We're going to move them down across that continuum. We're not going to not provide a service if someone needs it, but if we can move people from the higher end services to the lower end services. So what we're doing is we're putting that in now, getting it in place, and you know what? The $60 million is a conservative number, because what we did was we want to make sure it's real and not fake. So if something takes you 4 months to do, you're going to lose that 4 months of savings.
All right. At some juncture, I'd love to have you back to lay it all out when you lay it all out. Yeah. But it's the Medicaid, and it's a
huge challenge.
All that kind of stuff is bureaucratic, complicated stuff. Philosophically, though, are we too giveaway? Are we too poverty oriented? Are we too welfare oriented? I know cash assistance is not breaking the bank, but we've broken it up in so many different ways. Are we too friendly to people who have been on the system.
Dan, you got to go to Trudeau Center or Blackstone Arc and put yourself in those shoes. The state is accepting of this population, the transportation, the care. It's just enormously expensive. But what are our choices?
Well, I'm asking: Are we making tough choices?
You have an autistic child.
Where we have been laxed is not so much on putting a safety net for the neediest Rhode Islands. I think that's in place. Where we've been laxed in the past years is from the dollar that goes out of government to the dollar that actually the consumer receives. Are we doing the best in making sure that that dollar is wisely spent in terms of knowing whether our programs are working?
In other words, it's not necessarily philosophy, it's efficiency and execution?
It's efficiency, execution, and knowing that outcomes are there to support the decisions we make.
All right. When we come back, we'll have one more segment and get the governor out of here on this impromptu visit. Sound the clarion call. The talk radio ban is ended. We'll be right back with Governor Chafee and Health and Human Services Secretary Steve Costantino on The Dan York Show.
This is the show of record on Rhode Island's station of record, The Dan York Show on News Talk 630 WPRO and 99.7 FM.
All right, unannounced, Governor Chafee has stopped into the studio, and the talk radio ban is over. He's pronounced it over.
Took a U-turn on Wampanoag Trail.
Well, the nice thing is that not only, all due respect to you, Governor, whose company I've always enjoyed. You know, I've done some battling, and we will, but you are important, but as important or more. You know, free access, responsible free access to your administration is really something that I've been dying to get, and I'm glad that symbolically, not only did you come in, but Steve Costantino is here, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, to try to explain things. Because at the end of the day, this talk radio thing is about, sure, ratings, entertainment, but the information is actually the foundational goal here, and people won't listen if they're not being informed. So they need access to government. I appreciate you coming in.
This is a big step getting a budget done.
Yeah, I guess. I wonder, listen, every administration needs a little bit of breathing room, but you have none based on a cliff-type effect with federal stimulus money being eliminated from the picture, and that all facing you come July 1st. And so it causes you to do a whole bunch of things. We're talking about these health and human services cuts, and Steve was able to at least give us some bullet points on that. But let me touch base on a couple of the other ideas you had in your combined. By the way, do you plan on always combining a budget address with what is traditionally the time for State of the State, or was that just a one-time this year decision that you made?
Well, I had the inaugural address in January and then a budget address in March. I thought that was enough for
All right. Will it change as we go down in the future?
I have to decide down the road.
In this, you talked about an increase of 3% in pension contribution for state employees and 2% and change for the teachers to bring them up to 11.75%. You know, teachers and state employees may fall over when I say I'm not so sure that's fair, given the $40 million that you're talking about ignoring from that change doesn't seem to have any context. The unfunded liability is magnificently huge. Simultaneously, the state treasurer is talking about and hinting about a real tough colonoscopy coming for the pension program here.
Yes, I recognize that.
So why do this and torture them in lieu of what seems to be a big final change coming here?
Well, there are a number of factors involved, and one is that the treasurer wants to complete her studies that she's doing of the pension fund, and that's just going to take some time. So this is just a positive step, I think. The state employees did get their 3% January 1st. They're going to get another 3% or scheduled to July 1st as negotiated by the previous administration. So I thought it was good to at least make some effort, even if it's $40 million in the face of that makes sense. And the public's not going to be happy with state employees getting a 6% raise, and you factor that in.
Did you talk this up with the union leadership prior to this announcement?
Of course, we've tried to have outreach in every department, whether it's CVS and some of the changes that are affecting the corporation.
They've been quiet. I mean, they've relatively quiet. The pushback has been almost nil, which tells me
they're not happy.
Well, you know, I'm trying to figure that out. Are they going along thinking, you know, if this is the worst we have to deal with, we'll just shut up and take it? Or do they... There's no way that this is going to be the last bus of reform. No way. So tell me about that.
Well, I would hope that everybody's feeling shared sacrifice. This isn't a very, very difficult year. This is one of the worst years. Maybe the credit union crisis is comparable, but everybody recognizes we do not want this to be haunting us every year. Another tough year in Rhode Island. We want our economy to improve and make some tough decisions, and let's get things going.
Do you really think that this will roll out, this increased contribution to the pension system from the state employees and the teachers prior to the reform idea coming from Gina Raimondo? She says, give me May, June. I mean, that's going to line up for when I think you want to begin this July 1st. So might it be just an idea that was floated and never executed?
Well, Steve knows May, June is getting pretty late in the legislative session to really do anything.
Well, they've never operated with any kind of, how would you say, let's put it this way. Last-minute crisis management at 2 o'clock in the morning when it's 98 degrees and sweating seems to be the style of the General Assembly.
Well,
we're not going to deny that, are we, Mr. Former Finance Chairman?
Absolutely. Pressure adds a lot of innovation.
Well, we want to make sure we're making good decisions. And
that's one way to put it. All right. Well, we'll see how that whole thing
innovation,
goes.
The innovations made under pressure. We want to make sure they're good innovations.
Then you say, going back to the tax plan, and this is a surprise visit from the governor, so I'm flying here. 1% might go away if I can get the federal government to give me a Main Street internet rule.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a winner. And think of California, Ohio, Florida that are facing the same budget shortfalls. All Congress has to do is allow us to put our sales tax rate on those internet sales, and we have a great deal of relief.
And what's your projection about that moving forward? We hear very little about that nationally.
Yeah, the governors have to be more active. I was down there talking to all the governors, and they all seem to agree. Let's make it a priority.
So that's your promise, that 1% goes away as soon as the federal law is enacted.
That's my promise.
No matter what the financial conditions are.
I don't control the General Assembly, but that would be what I would urge them to do.
Well, then talk to me about that note, because I'm glad that you recognize that. In a weak form of government, the governor, the way it's situated, not weak, but weaker than others.
Constitutionally here.
This is a presentation that you make, and you set the tone, and we can talk all about what happens from there. But what is your projection of the percentage of your ideas actually bearing fruit after you toss this one at them? Because the constituents are kicking their tails in over this sales tax situation.
Yeah, I don't have a crystal ball, but we've been working with the General Assembly through this process with the committee chairs, and I did not want the governor's budget just to be put in the recycling bin.
Tell me about the education commissioner. She endorses George Carullo. I still don't understand your rationale here. I know he's brilliant. I know he's seasoned. I know he's all those good things. He's also lobbying in his professional life the government. Two questions. First of all, one more time, why Carullo, and why do you find comfort in a guy who actually got confirmed by a body that he's going to lobby on behalf of his clients? You don't see the conflict there?
On the first question, you look at many of my appointees to this administration, they have a relationship with the General Assembly. And I know from the other governors, if you can't work with the General Assembly, you're not going to get anything done. And I think that's one of the reasons. I said this over the course of the campaign. That's one of the reasons Rhode Island is in the situation we're in.
But isn't that
the General Assembly and the governor fighting? So many of my appointees have a good relationship with the General Assembly. Steve Constantino sitting across the table here. Richard Leach has been a former senator and lieutenant governor. Charlie Fogarty, former senator and lieutenant governor. George Carullo, former majority leader. So it's a consistent approach to we're in this together, and we got to get the state going together.
Respectfully, Governor, I buy Constantino because he has left one role and is doing another. But with this relationship thing, you've got a guy in George Carullo who literally will be advocating for a client while he's looking for business to be done on the part of the Board of Regents. I'm not sure that you can have two conversations with a particular person in the General Assembly on two different fronts, serving two different masters at the same time.
This is a small state, and I think it's very common that, for instance, Bob Flanders' law firm lobbied on a number of issues. That didn't undermine the performance he did as chair of the Board of Regents.
All right. George Carullo was quoted as saying, hey, I'm paraphrasing, I think the education system's doing pretty well, believe it or not. There's a lot more hype than reality, and I think we can slow down. That is not the rhetoric coming out of the ed commissioner. And so everyone looks at that and says, what? Then, surprisingly, 2 days ago, she endorses George Carullo. I don't know why she would endorse someone who's going to be her boss. That's kind of a bottom-up management style that I have not seen. But clearly that's not her decision. Did you ask her for that endorsement?
I did not personally. But I want to go back to what you said about Mr. Carullo's comments about the school system. And I do think here in Rhode Island, too often we stress the negative. It's negativity, and I want to change that conversation. Let's have some conversation about what we're doing well.
Well, amen. She's the one that brought who stewarded
failing schools and.
Well, wait a second. Now, she stewarded $75 million in Race to the Top money to change the dynamic. It was something we celebrated. Constantino had a lot to do with that. Everybody else who was here had a lot to do with that. So she has been someone who's calling a spade, but saying, you know what, we got big things coming. Any move away from charter schools and some of the stuff that's in that application will cost us that $75 million. My thinking is she did the right thing politically because she really has, I said yesterday, her kingdom is not of this state. It is of Washington. All you guys got to do is step off that application and you lose that dough, right?
Well, at the National Governors Association meeting, President Obama addressed the governors, and he said, his words right to my ears, we're going to allow you, the governors, to have great flexibility with Race to the Top. And that's what we want. We want some flexibility.
Well, what do you want to change?
Commissioner Gist and I were at Paul Cuffey School, a charter school. I was very, very impressed. But there were 900 applicants for 43 positions at the Paul Cuffey School.
Which means you need more.
No, that means there's 800 students that are getting 820 students that are getting, or 60 students are getting left behind going to another school that they don't want to go to. That's what we need to change. There's 860 students that are going to another school. We want to make sure they're happy to go to that school and their education's going to be productive for them.
When you say that you didn't ask her to endorse
these
George
charter
Carlin,
schools tend to take our focus off the ball.
Do you know who did ask her to endorse
No, I don't.
George Carlin? But do you believe that I'm probably correct that she was asked to do that as opposed to she thought of it herself? Just a little pressure, a little political pressure?
I don't know the answer to that.
Not that Lane Chafee would be involved in any kind of political gamesmanship in his tenure as governor, correct?
She might have said, let me endorse George Carlin. We've had great conversations together, and we're going to get this school system going in the right direction.
All right, not exactly sure that's the case. Last thought, because I promised to get you out here. I think your political capital was salvaged in a lot of ways by the appointment of Steve O'Donnell. That was a rough one, as your quote is saying. That was a tough one, losing Doherty. O'Donnell not only is the right choice, but he makes life a lot easier for you right now, doesn't he?
Yes, I like when there's an easy decision, such as that one was.
All right. You got to fly. Steve, good to see you. Hope that we continue the working relationship because you're going to have a lot of things going on that people are going to want to have answers for because there's a lot of lives at stake when it comes to health and human services. So not a bad bounce back from losing the mayor, Ray. Huh? It's nice to land on your feet and find a gig. All right.
Challenges.
Challenges.
He went from running for mayor of Providence to Health and Human Services with no easy answers. And a tough job, but he has the experience to do a good job.
All right.
Great job. We're going to get the state going.
What's your next stop? Disneyland?
I doubt it.
All right, Governor. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks for ending the ban on Talk Radio.
You're welcome.
All right, 2:16. We'll come back and talk all about this impromptu visit at 438 WPRO.
The Dan York Show.